Okay, what I was gonna do is go ahead and get started with this exam 2 review.
Should I lock
And
in?
the big piece to this is gonna be chapter 11 Congress, chapter 12 presidency, and then all of the classes, 9, 10, and 11 o'clock have got different pieces of chapter 3. So I'll go ahead and get started, probably just with some chapter 3 things. For the 9 and the 10 o'clock, really all y'all have are the articles. So crackdown in Arizona, humane execution, please view the fetus, and then the stop and frisk. Does anybody have any questions about any of the articles? 11 o'clock, y'all have the articles too, but y'all will have a little bit more. Does anybody have any questions about any of these 4 articles?
Yeah, what are the articles, the rape kit?
Go ahead and zoom in on her.
No.
Crackdown in Arizona, humane execution, please view the fetus, and stop and frisk. This is from the federalism chapter, so this is chapter 3. What questions do y'all have about any of these?
Can you elaborate more on the crackdown in Arizona?
What was the crackdown in Arizona article?
It's the one where they could search people who were like suspicious aliens in the U.S. So if they kind of looked Hispanic, they gave the police the right to, kind of stop and ask them questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead and address this. The crackdown in Arizona article is actually a pretty good one. If you remember on this one, this was in Arizona. Do y'all remember what the estimate was of how many illegal immigrants were present in Arizona at the time of the article?
It was over 100,000. Right?
A little bit bigger than that. Anybody remember?
460?
Yeah, it was. It was about 460,000. I'd probably take almost 500,000 it was estimated. And how much was this actually costing Arizona residents, estimated again in terms of taxpayer dollars?
Hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. Why did Arizona, what were they interested in doing as far as passing this law? Their argument was that in fact, if you go back and you look at this, they're saying it's the federal government's job to protect our borders. And they said the federal government is not protecting our borders, so we're going to pass a law to remove some of these illegal or undocumented immigrants. That's what they were doing. And they were saying that we're not that populated of a state, about 500,000 people are here illegally, and they're saying that it's estimated to cost us hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Now, what was the problem with this law? People raised some stink about it, right? What's the problem? Anybody?
Is the expenditure on finding the illegals?
Well, there's even something more basic than the expenditure.
Like it's your freedom because like you kind of investigate, not investigate, like get in your personal space basically.
Get in your personal space. Okay, here's the question. Pavel, if you remember in your class, I probably would have asked somebody in class, would you search Pavel to see if he was an undocumented immigrant?
Oh, you did ask me.
Yeah, so what was the point with me asking that question?
Discrimination.
It was discrimination. Discrimination against whom?
Black and Hispanics.
Primarily the Hispanic folks, or people that would appear to look Hispanic, since it was on the Mexico border. So on the one hand, you've got this idea of people are breaking our laws, they're wasting our taxpayer dollars, they're here in the country illegally, but then you've got other folks saying, wait a minute, this is discrimination, because you're just looking at somebody based upon the color of their skin. Pavel is not going to get checked. Jillian is not going to get checked. Aaliyah is not going to get checked. Stefan is not going to get checked. But there might be other folks, in fact, again, if they appeared a certain way, that would, and it was just based on the color of their skin. Do you remember what all of the laws were that Arizona had passed?
There was 3, right?
There were several, yeah.
I remember that the end case with when they went to federal court. They said that all laws were already in place, so they couldn't have these laws specifically for the state.
That's exactly right. There were several things. One was they had laws dealing with the transport of people illegally into the country. They had laws for employing people that were illegally in the country. They had laws against housing people that were illegally in the country. And the federal government took a look at this and they said, we've already got federal laws in place. You do not need these laws. This is a violation of federalism. Regarding the papers, please. And do you remember what they compared that to? Papers, please. What country that they reminded people of?
Germany.
Nazi Germany is who it reminded them of. And one of the criticisms was, we don't want to be like Nazi Germany, so in fact we shouldn't have these kinds of laws. Ultimately, the Supreme Court, did they uphold this or did they strike it down as discrimination? They actually upheld the papers, please part. So to your point from just a few minutes ago, Christopher, The laws that dealt with the housing, the transport, and the employment, all of those were struck down. The Supreme Court upheld the Papers, Please, and effectively they're saying that since the federal government has failed to act, Arizona now has the ability to act since the federal government hasn't. That's cracked down in Arizona, and this again falls from the federalism chapter. So they're in Arizona trying to create a solution to a problem that the federal government hasn't fixed, and in theory they have the ability to fix it on their own, fix it on their own way. What do you have about humane or view the fetus or stop and frisk?
What was humane again?
Humane was the execution, the death penalty.
Okay.
Do you remember, what does it mean to require somebody to have a humane execution?
Shouldn't feel pain.
They shouldn't feel pain. And if you remember, I compared this to the Humane Society when we talked about it in class. Humane Society puts animals to sleep to allow them to kind of die with dignity instead of, rummaging through trash cans or being in dog fights or whatever out on the street. Well, a humane execution is you should not have to feel pain while you're being executed. And the theory or the logic is, what is the amendment that it violates if you do?
Cruel and unusual punishment.
Cruel and unusual punishment, which would be the 8th Amendment. So they want to make sure that it's consistent. Now, in the article, the death penalty, the Supreme Court put the death penalty on a moratorium. They did not give the death penalty for basically a year because they wanted to figure out if it was cruel and unusual because this case was proceeding through the courts. And ultimately, they did get it to the Supreme Court. And if you remember, ultimately, of course, we're still executing people. The Supreme Court said that it was perfectly legal. It was not a violation of cruel and unusual. Now, here's the piece on this. Can you give me some examples of death penalties that we talked about? Go ahead.
The electric chair.
The electric chair. How'd the electric chair work?
You set them down and you, connect, what's the hat on their heads and stuff like that?
You put the hat on their head.
Whatever it was, and then you go up to like a certain electricity.
How much voltage was it?
1600.
1600 volts. If you saw the Green Mile movie, and I know that Hollywood can be a little bit weird with things sometimes, over-exaggerating, they strap you in that chair, they're going to place that cap on your head, as you had said.
Mhm.
They're also going to have a sponge in here, and they're going to channel those 1600 volts right straight into your head, and in theory, you're going to die really, really fast. What was the problem with it?
Sometimes people don't die.
Sometimes people don't die, or sometimes when they did die, what would happen on the way? They burst into flames. That doesn't sound like that's not cruel and unusual. That sounds like that would hurt like hell. Can you give me some others? Death penalty examples.
Gas chamber.
Gas chamber. How'd the gas chamber work?
They put a prisoner in a pressurized and sealed room
Yeah, they're going to basically tie him down on that gurney.
with cyanide gas, and
Uh-huh.
it was supposed to make them unconscious and suffocate them.
Yeah, it's going to basically put them to sleep, and then the argument would be is that the poison, the toxin in there is actually going to paralyze them and then they would die in their sleep. Some people have said that they like the idea of dying in their sleep because oftentimes that would be maybe a more peaceful way of going. What was the problem with the gas chamber?
Some of them wouldn't die, and they would not be unconscious.
Yeah, they wouldn't fall
feel-
asleep.
Yeah.
So they would actually feel themselves choking or their organs paralyzing. And in fact, that doesn't sound like a good way to go either. Go ahead, Pablo.
Didn't it look like Nazi Germany with gas chambers?
I'm sorry, say again?
It's like what they did with Jew in Germany during the World War II.
Go ahead and zoom in on him. I'm not familiar with all of that part of it. This was just,
He's
one.
He's talking about the internment.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been like with the showers and things like that. This would have, I don't know enough to comment, especially with the film running. So let me just test you on, we'll talk about things we're going to test you on.
I mean,
What-
you can cut it.
No, I don't want to zoom in on him. This is all Pavel from Russia. Other examples. Go ahead.
Stoning,
Stoning. How did stoning work?
they bury them and only have their head on top and throw rocks at their head.
Yeah, they would. They would bury them, and I think I told you I used to think that was like dodgeball.
Oh, yeah.
But they bury you up until your head, and they're going to be throwing these things, so you have no choice but to move. And in fact, you would think they could kill you quick, but you would also think that they could draw it out too, depending upon how they hit you. Any other thoughts? Go ahead.
Lethal injection.
Lethal injection. How did that work?
Well, I think they had 3 different kinds of shots.
They did.
One that shut down your organs, or one that shut down the nervous system,
Okay.
one that shut down the organs, and then one that actually killed you.
Well, there was one that was really important that they're always supposed to give first.
The one that
Is it bad?
that makes you unconscious.
The one that actually puts you to sleep. The first thing that they're supposed to give you is the shot that is actually going to put you unconscious. Then they're going to give you the one that effectively is going to deal with the organs, the lungs in particular, and then the third one is going to stop the heart and basically going to cause a heart attack. Now on this, what was the problem that they had? Because lethal injection, if you remember, in order to amend the Constitution, you need 3/4, so you need 38 states. 38 states actually have a legal death penalty. 37 of them use the lethal injection. What was the problem with it?
People would wake up before it was over.
People would wake up before it was over. Close, but not quite.
They would miss the veins.
They would miss the vein sometimes, but there's something even better. What's that?
They wouldn't give the injection, the drugs in order.
Yeah, they might give you the one that gives you the heart attack first, and then they would give you the one that puts you to sleep last, so you would be conscious. And understand, I believe in some of the classes I had given y'all the Oklahoma death penalty article. Do you remember that one where the girl was shot and buried alive? And then, in fact, they had given the guy the new drug for lethal injection, and he died over the course of like 30 minutes. They actually canceled the death penalty in the middle of it. Yeah, they canceled the death penalty in the middle of it, and then he died after they had canceled the death penalty.
They closed the curtains. Yeah.
Exactly. See, it's really messy because they're still talking about whether or not this is really humane. It's not if you give the shots in the wrong order. Sometimes it's not when you give them in the right order. And just to give you a couple of other things on this, with the death penalty, we talked about crucifixion, if you'll recall. We talked about drawing and quartering, if you recall. We talked about impressment or stacking the stones on you. Y'all remember all of these things, right? Yeah? Pavel, you're not familiar with impressment? Does anybody want to tell him about impressment, how that worked?
They just stack stones on top of you until you soon enough you can't.
Yeah, they would literally press the life out of you. So they would stack stones on you, stone, 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 and when your body was its weakest, the stones would be the heaviest, and you eventually would just not be able to breathe because of the weight. Yeah.
That was an episode of Criminal Minds.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead, zoom in on her when she says something like that. View the Fetus. View the Fetus was the abortion one, and I think maybe one of the classes had this.
You did.
Yeah, we.
Yeah, if y'all did, so the 10 o'clock, did you have it too at 9 o'clock? Okay, I'm not going to give y'all this again, but the 11 o'clock folks, Stefan, did you guys have Please View the Fetus? Okay, I'm going to remove that one. But do y'all remember Stop and Frisk?
Yes.
Wait, so
That was the New
so
York
the please view the fetus won't be on.
Remove, please, yes, Please View the Fetus. Yes, remove that one. So what was Stop and Frisk?
It was in New York. and
Was
they-
New York City.
And they were allowed to stop and frisk anybody who looked suspicious.
They were able to stop and frisk anybody that looked suspicious. I think the other word that they used, or moved furtively. Like they were moving like they didn't want to be seen or caught doing something, this kind of a thing. What were some of the statistics? I don't ask you for many, but this article had some statistics.
She has them all, I bet.
Yeah, Nadia's got them all.
So 87% of the 4.4 million people stopped over the last decade have been Black or Hispanic.
87% of the 4.4 million people that were stopped over the last decade were either Black or Hispanic. Now, in the big picture of things, there is no way that New York is 87% Black or Hispanic. So right there, you've got discrimination issues, potentially maybe. You would also seem to suggest that they're not targeting the white folks in this instance, and so maybe again there could be discrimination, but that's maybe not the most important point right now. Go ahead.
And their argument was that since they were in they were mostly the crime was in the black part of, the majority of people living in that area were black, that was the area.
That would have been one of the arguments. It's really not based on race, but maybe it would be based upon class, and if it was based upon the demographics living in a particular area. There were some other statistics, Nadia. What else do you have?
90%, they released 90% without any charges.
So not almost 90% of the 4.4 million that they stopped over a decade were either Black or Hispanic, and then basically 90% of the 90% were released without charges. Now, on the one hand, you could say that they're just targeting people. On the other hand, though, what would be the other argument that you could say that maybe would suggest that this program is working?
They're removing 10%.
Well, they're removing 10%, or you could also say, if I know that I'm likely to be targeted for a stop and frisk, I'm not going to carry the weapons out in the first place. And what were the weapons that they were confiscating? Do y'all remember?